We all here are with Northwest Suburban Organizing for Action. That's a group in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. We're an indivisible chapter. We have a bunch of different groups that deal with progressive issues across the board, from climate change to women's issues um, to financial issues. Jim and I run a group called Restore Our Democracy, which is focused on the issues around our democracy. And I'm going to present to you tonight some discussion of what's been going on over the last month and what it all means to us and what we ought to do about it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides now, and I'm going to get started with this presentation. Okay, so today we're going to talk about what's been going on recently. We're going to look through some of the executive orders, but I have to tell you that I don't have a comprehensive list of all of them because there's just too many and they just come out so fast. The last 2 or 3 days worth of stuff are not reflected in here, but we will talk about it anyway. So we're going to talk about how all that relates to Elon Musk's Doge. We're talking about how that relates to Project 2025. But most importantly, we're going to talk about what their objective is here because there's a lot of noise going on and there's a lot of distractions, but we need to focus on what they're really up to. We'll talk about how the judiciary and how Congress and how the stock market is responding to all this stuff. We're going to talk about how bad it really could be if they push it and if we let them push it to the maximum and what we can do. And any presentation I ever give always has a call to action because it's our actions that defend our democracy. He began his second term with a flurry of executive orders, and they reflect his America First approach. And there's a whole bunch of them. I'll mention some of the more important areas, but let me start by saying that Project 2025 said that they were going to have a whole list of executive orders ready to be implemented on day one, but it doesn't look like that's what happened here. The executive orders that came out on day 1 or 2 look like they were all drafted by Stephen Miller in a big hurry because they're all really pretty sloppy. They're not very well written. But he had orders on immigration and border security. He had orders on government operations in his attempts to reduce the size of the federal government, hiring freezing, terminating remote work, and putting Doge in charge of cutting down the size of our government, no matter what Congress had in mind. He had orders around foreign policy and trade, which actually weren't very well received. In fact, when you look at what he did, when he put when he put tariffs, he announced tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and immediately the stock market went downwards that morning, and immediately he reversed them. In the afternoon and the evening, both the ones on Mexico and the ones on Canada were off because I believe it's because he responded to the fact that the market tanked because of what he had done. And he's claimed he had big wins with those groups, but he didn't really. He had very minor wins. Mostly they just said, we'll do what we've already committed to do. He had orders on DEI, civil rights, gender issues, orders on reducing regulatory actions, orders on energy and the environment, unleashing, pumping. And in fact, if you think about what people cared about, a lot of them, most of the people who actually put him in office cared about the price of groceries. And what he said was making oil cheaper will lower the price of groceries, which doesn't make sense. But that's why that's where his energy and environment orders come in. He had orders around protecting the meaning of values of American citizenship, which is really aimed at limiting the birthright citizenship, where we say that if you're born here, you're a citizen here, something that's been our law for 100 years since the Civil War. In fact, the reason we have that was to make it clear that children of the ex-slaves were going to be citizens. Deregulation, I mentioned, getting rid of anything that Biden did. A lot of what you see him doing is just saying anything that anybody else did, especially Biden, anything that anybody else did has got to be bad because I didn't do it. So anything that I didn't do is leaving, and only things I do are around. Federal hiring freezing, which was really a big deal, especially amongst the National Park Services. The National Park Services are right now in the process of hiring summer temporary rangers to staff the parks for the summer, and he just stopped all of it. Restrictions on transgender treatment, reinstatement of discharged service members who got kicked out because they wouldn't take the vaccines, a TikTok ban. This is a prime example. Congress Congress passed a law that said that we can't have a foreign ownership of an important media in this country. And the Supreme Court upheld that law. And yet Trump said, no, we're not going to enforce that law. Limitations on foreign aids has been a big deal. It's completely taken apart our foreign aid process that Congress implemented, that Congress said we must do. He just got rid of the security clearances for anybody he doesn't like. People that are still under threat from Al Qaeda have had their security clearances and their protective details removed. Just there's tons and tons and tons and tons and more than this that I haven't kept up with because there's more every day, and they're just a tremendous departure from anything that's ever happened before. But they didn't really, as I mentioned, these things didn't really come just from Project 2025. Project 2025 bragged they were going to have all these executive orders ready to go. But these came, first of all, from Stephen Miller. A bunch of them are just things he thought up on the top of his head. I mean, the whole Gulf of America thing, the idea of a national investment fund, these are just brainchilds of his. Lately, a lot of the ones that are coming out are suggested by Musk. And most of them are not well crafted. They try and bring these into court, and opposing attorneys point out the flaws in their filings, and they have to correct the filings. It's really pretty embarrassing from the viewpoint of a professional attorney what you're doing. There's been a lot of controversial orders and memos through cabinet members. The Department of Justice has been investigating senior FBI executives who were involved in January 6th. They wanted a list of everybody who was involved in any capital inquiries, capital right inquiries, and that's really kind of shameful because a lot of the people that were being investigated over January 6th were back home in Phoenix or Memphis or Portland, and so the FBI sent out orders to the local field offices to go look into these people and try and find them and nab them. And the people in the field offices just following the orders from Washington to pursue these guys. And anybody who did their job in those days is on the bad list. Avoid profanities. He was on the bad list for the Trump administration. And anybody who was involved is their jobs in jeopardy. State Department, the same thing. He assigned a very controversial journalist as Undersecretary for Diplomacy and Public Affairs. Department of Homeland Security was told to summarily deport migrants, and something that's not on the slide, but recently the acting head, the assistant head, has been kicked out because he hasn't been deporting people fast enough. In fact, over the last couple of weeks, the level of deportations occurring is lower than what was occurring under the Biden administration because they're just screwed up. They're just screwed up. He wants to get rid of the Department of Education. The OMB has been taken over by Musk. A great example of that is, and this isn't in the slides, but recently Trump said to Musk, we need to get tougher on getting rid of more employees. And they can't just fire a lot of people under civil service protection. So now what they just did is Musk sent an email to everybody that says, tell me what you did last week. And if you don't respond, I take that as your resignation. And this is significant because this is one of the first times that his other cabinet members haven't really backed Musk up. A bunch of his cabinet members have said, don't respond to that. You work for me. You don't work for Musk. You don't work for OPM. But there's been all kinds of pushback and legal challenges on all this stuff. Birthright citizenship, pause on federal grants, the Schedule F stuff, all that stuff. All this stuff has been blocked. And in many cases, he has been honoring those, at least partially. I've heard that the pause on federal grants is not been completely lifted. There are still a bunch of areas where federal grants are being held up. But for example, the civil service Schedule F stuff, he hasn't really tried to fire a bunch of people who are clearly under civil service protection yet. He's been firing people who are on probation. He's been putting people on administrative leave, which doesn't mean they're fired. They still get their pay. and it just don't work. And there's a real reason why he's honoring those lower court injunctions, which we'll get to. So you understand exactly what's going on here. So let's talk about Doge. Trump initially described this as an advisory body. It would be operating outside the government. It would be offering advice and guidance, but it hasn't been like that at all. It's, the way I look at Doge. I look at Doge the way in Nazi Germany, the SS were the people that went around and enforced the Fuhrer's will. That to me is what Doge is doing here. Put them on administrative leave. And the same thing happened with the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, government departments, and instruct them how to lay off people, instruct them to get rid of all the probationary people and to get rid of the probationary people because they can. So they're really integrated into the government system right now, kind of like a virus throughout our system. They say they're modernizing our technology, but most importantly, they have embedded their people in every federal agency. They've talked about a software modernization initiative, but I haven't seen. I'm a software guy. I know what software modernization means, and it's not something you do in a week or two. What they have been doing is scarfing up data from these systems so they can find people they can lay off. They can find people they can claim are fraud. They can find contracts that they can cancel. So they seem to claim this is improving efficiency, reducing fraud, but really all it's doing is reducing expenses, despite whatever the cost of those reduction expenses are for our people or people in other countries. So Doge is not doing what he said they were going to do. What have they done recently? They did this deferred resignation thing, the fork in the road thing. That was clearly a Musk initiative because it was the same email that Musk sent to his people in Twitter when he took over. And there was maybe 70,000 people who took the offer and said, "Okay, I'll stop working, and I expect to get paid through September." You know what? A lot of those people are going to leave anyway, because if you look at the turnover in the federal government, there's 100,000 people every year that leave, mostly because they retire, some because they get another job. So most of these people that took the deferred resignation were probably going to leave anyway, but we just gave them six months free money to leave. He's built his own email system so he can send email to all the federal employees. Like he just sent this one saying, "Tell me what you did last week, or you're going to be fired." This is unheard of influence in how our government works. Look what he did to USAID. USAID is supposed to be an independent agency. It was created by Congress. It was kind of insulated from political influence because Congress wanted us to build goodwill in the world by helping poor countries continually, no matter which party was in power. Musk called it a criminal organization. That's nonsense. But apparently Trump just said, go ahead and do what you want, Musk. And Rubio, who's the Secretary of State, just went along with it too. It's pretty clear that Trump doesn't have the legal right to take apart an organization that Congress created that's supposed to be independent from political pressures. But there it is. Congress doesn't seem to be trying to stop him. Courts are doing what they can to stop him. The courts are nowhere near fast enough to stop him. He accessed the federal payment system, and it's really clear why he accessed the federal payment system. His first goal was to stop the stuff that USAID was doing, the overseas payments of foreign aid. And people inside the system have told us that the reason he dug his fingers into the payment system because he felt that if he controlled the checkbook, he could stop payments to programs that he didn't approve of or that he felt Trump didn't approve of. The senior Treasury officials appointed by Musk, I think I keep confusing who's the president here, appointed by Trump, allowed Musk into the system and allowed him to gain access to who's getting paid. We haven't really seen Musk stopping payments, but he's there. His people are in control of that system. Even when they say you only have read access to the system, I'm a software guy, and I know that when you get root access to the system, you have access to any part of it you want. You can do anything you want. The intent is that they have only read access, but the reality is they can do anything they want. So the reason they wanted to get in there to stop foreign aid, and they said that really out loud, to the extent permitted by law, we like to implement the pause on foreign aid as soon as possible. That's the guy that's running the Treasury at this point. He served as the chief of staff to the Department of Treasury. He is in that role now, and he attained that position through Trump. So there did that in order to give Trump control of payments. But when he gets control of payments, he has control of all payments. He has full access to the system, all payments, including Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid grants, the payments to government contractors. All that stuff is in their control. It's now all under control of this foreign national who wasn't elected by anybody, who is forcing out persons who actually have the right and the knowledge how to run the system. And he will now get to decide what gets paid and what not gets paid. This is just absurd. And the courts have been in weighing in on this, but the administration is only half-heartedly supporting what the court's been telling them to do. Now, if you look at how all this relates to Project 2025, I got to tell you, before the election, I was given presentations every week on what Project 2025 had in store for us and how dangerous it would be to put Trump in office with this plan in place. And even though Trump said, I don't know anything about it, the thing is that Trump's platform sounded a lot like 2025 without all the details. Trump's platform was really vague, where Project 2025 was specific. So, of course, when Trump gets into office, he brings in some people to flesh out his platform, to provide specifics to his vague platform. And you know what? Surprise. The specifics are all just like Project 2025. Project 2025 is all over his new administration. 75% of what he's doing was written in Project 2025. And the people who wrote Project 2025 are in his administration now. Time found 2/3 of what he's doing is in there. Some other guy found 30 of 47 his initial executive orders came out of there. CNN again thought 2/3. And this is from a couple of weeks ago. So the stuff we've seen lately about getting rid of a major military official who happens to be black or a female, that was in there. Project 2025 is all over everything he's doing, especially in the areas of immigration, border security, environmental regulation, energy policy. All of his actions here mirror what's in Project 2025, and it's no surprise. We knew that he was going to do this. Anybody who's surprised that this is what he's doing just wasn't paying attention, because while he didn't say explicitly he's going to do this, all the extreme right people that we knew he was going to bring to his administration said this is what we're going to do. It doesn't help for us to say, I told you so. So we shouldn't be saying to the other side, I told you so. But we know we told you so. On the other hand, what we need to be saying to them is not I told you so. We need to be saying to them is, boy, things are going badly. Things are not working out well. We need to all work together to try and find a better way. Several of the memos issued by OPM were actually found to have been written by Project 2025 people. You see, when you send out a PDF, there's some internal data inside the PDF. Once again, I'm a software guy. I understand this stuff. There's some internal data inside the PDF that tells you who wrote it. And a really professional organization will clean that stuff up so that you'd see the PDF, you can't tell who wrote it. But they sent this one out, and it was clear that the guys who wrote it were people who worked for Project 2025. And, they immediately rescinded it after the news organizations blasted this out and cleaned that stuff up and put it out. But we can see that these memos coming out of the Office of Personnel Management are being written not by the people who work in personnel management, but the people who wrote Project 2025. These guys, Peters and Shirk, they have long ties to conservative think tanks. Noah Peters, who is now a senior advisor at OPM, he represented controversial figures like Kyle Rittenhouse, Jerry Taylor, various NRA officials. And Shirk, he worked for the Heritage Foundation, America First Policy Institute. He's credited with developing Schedule F, classification. The point that we can see this metadata that they were so sloppy they wouldn't clean up shows us who is actually writing this stuff for them. There's a lot going on. It's easy to lose track of it. I mean, I spent most of the day today trying to keep up with everything that's going on. And we have to focus on what's important here and not get distracted and not get hysterical about another thing every day. So the important thing here is to understand what their objectives are. And it's not just so much Trump's objectives, it's the objective of all the people who's advising him, the extreme right people that he brings into government. They have this idea that the president should be able to do whatever the heck he wants because he's the president. They call this the unitary executive theory, and they want to greatly increase the authority of the president. They want to make sure that executive orders can do whatever they want. And the reason they want to do that is because the stuff they have in Project 2025, Project 2025 was just a grab bag of all the right-wing wishes of all the right-wing organizations, eliminating job protections, overhauling federal agencies, placing independent agencies under direct presidential control, the removing officials. He wants to get rid of officials who aren't his people. They want to challenge the legal precedents. We're going to send all these slides to all the recipients. I know I'm going through these slides fast. You'll have these slides. You'll be able to look at them in your own sweet time. They want to get rid of federal civil service protections so they can make the government entire patronage job. The point is that they want to push the boundaries of executive power as much as possible. They want to amass as much power in the presidency as possible. And they want to reshape our government so that the legislative and judicial branches have minimal power so that the executive can just do what he wants. And the reason they want to do this is because they can't get their programs through Congress. Nothing in Project 2025 would ever get through Congress. They've given up on constitutional democracy. They've given up on trying to get what they want through the means of our Constitution. They've decided that the only way they can get what they want is by putting the president into a position, essentially, of a monarch. That's what they're doing. That's what all this amounts to. And all the stuff that's happened since I wrote those slides is all along the same lines. Changing our democracy is their goal. You know, the original design by the Constitution is that Congress runs this country. Congress is the primary group. People say we have three equal branches. No, we don't have three equal branches. Congress is the primary branch. Congress defines what the judiciary can do. Congress defines what the executive can do. When Congress says there will be an executive organization which is independent of the political sphere, like the Federal Reserve, or the USAID, or Consumer Finance Protection Division. Congress defines those things. And that's the way our Constitution is set up. Now, you know, changing our Constitution is not supposed to be easy. You're supposed to get an amendment either through Congress or through a constitutional convention, and then all the 3/4 of the states have to approve it. That's why our Constitution is rarely amended. But, you know, in effect, our Congress does change just because the Supreme Court reinterprets it. You know, for example, we used to think for 50 years that our Constitution protected reproductive rights until it didn't. So the Supreme Court is effectively changing what our Constitution means every time they make a decision. And what we're seeing here is that the extreme right is pushing on the boundaries of our Constitution. They're pushing on birthright citizenship. They're pushing on the powers of the purse. They're pushing on independent agencies. And they're hoping that the extreme right-wing Supreme Court that they built in the last Trump administration will reinterpret our Constitution and give the presidency rights that the Constitution didn't really mean. And, you know, the Supreme Court might not give them everything they asked for, but they might give them some of it, which is really dangerous. That means what's happening here is just an attack on the democracy through reinterpretation of the Constitution. They will decide that coming here on a tourist visa to give birth doesn't make your child a citizen. They could decide that. If we like what our Constitution means to us, we need to defend it now. That's the attack we're seeing on democracy. Changes like this really should only occur through an amendment process. But the right can't get these changes through Congress in our amendment process. So they're seeking to do it without our consent. They're seeking to do it through the Supreme Court. What they want would be really damaging for us. What if they want to move all the power from Congress to the presidency so that the presidency could just implement any policy he wants? That would be good for our country because look what would happen. Normally, when policy is changed through Congress, our policy changes kind of slowly because it's hard to build consensus in Congress, especially with a filibuster in the Senate. You need 60 senators. But if the president could just do whatever he wants, then hey, a Republican president comes in and he pushes us far to the right, or a Democratic president comes in and pushes us far to the left, the country would be whipsawed between far right and far left. That wouldn't be good for the country. That wouldn't be good for our standing in the world. So the Constitution doesn't make the president a king just to avoid that problem. And that's where the extreme right is trying to take us right now. And I try and tell them all the time, you wouldn't like it if you got this, but this is where they're going. I don't want to talk about that, but I do want to make it clear that there are some people in Congress who understand that there's no question that the billionaire class is trying to take over our government right now in their self-interest, and that Trump has decided that he's just not going to accept any legal limitations. What he wants to do until the courts tell him otherwise, and he believes he has enough sway with the courts to get what he wants, and maybe he will. Now, let's talk about the kind of responses we've seen. The judiciary is doing what they can. They have listed a bunch of injunctions. There have been some times when they've said we don't have the authority to stop him, but attempts to end birthright citizenship, attempts to pause federal disbursement, attempts to implement Schedule F. These kind of things have been slowed down by the court. The court can slow them down some. It's not clear what will happen when it gets up to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court has not always ruled in his favor. So some of these things get up to the Supreme Court. Some of them will get shot down. Few of them might get through. But that's really not the way this is supposed to work. It's the real problem. There's two problems. The real problem would be what would happen if he decides just not to agree with a court decision. He's agreeing with the lower court decisions, at least saying he's agreeing. Because if he said, I'm not going to agree to this lower court decision, the Supreme Court would likely have to say, oh, you have to. You just have to. So he doesn't want to challenge anything until it gets up to the Supreme Court. But when it gets up to the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court says, no, you can't do that, Trump, the real danger here is what happens if he says, I don't care what you guys say. His people have already said this. J.D. Vance has said you should fire every middle bureaucrat and replace them all with your own people. And if the Supreme Court tells you to stop it, you should tell them to shove it. He said that in a public speech because, I mean, back in the day, Andrew Jackson said that to the Supreme Court about something, and they like Andrew Jackson. So the bottom line is there's really no easy way to force Trump to obey a court order. The constitutional way to fix this problem, where you have a president who is violating congressional law and violating our Constitution, would be through impeachment and removal, or at least the threat thereof. I mean, we didn't really impeach and remove Nixon. Congress just went to him and said, you have to step down or we will impeach you. Congress right now doesn't seem to be ready to do that, but constitutionally, that would be the right way to solve this problem. So will he obey court orders that come down? Well, he did some. He obeys some because I really talked about this already. SCOTUS will require he follows lower court orders. But if he gets to the higher court, he'll want them to reinterpret our Constitution along his lines. So he probably won't outright disobey a lower court order because he wants to get to the Supreme Court. But if he gets to the Supreme Court and he loses and he decides not to obey them, then we're in a really, really, really bad spot, and only Congress could get us out of it. Now, Congress has had some input. When he first put up a stop on all federal grants, many GOP senators went to him and said, you're hurting my state. You're hurting my voters. Stop it. and he rescinded that order. And there's a reason why he listens to red state senators, because he knows that red state senators are the people that can remove him from office. It only takes a majority in the House to impeach, but it takes a supermajority in the Senate to remove. And every impeachment in the past, he was impeached twice. The red state senators who saved his, you know what. He knows he needs red state senators on his side, so he will listen to them. It's unlikely that they will threaten with Trump removal right now, but there's got to be a serious pushback, especially from MAGA voters. And there can be. I mean, he's hurting farmers. When he stopped USAID, USAID buys wheat from farmers. There's all these farmers who were all ready to sell their wheat to USAID. Now they won't. If he cuts back Medicaid, there's a whole bunch of MAGA voters who are on Medicaid. The pressure on him can come from people, voters, who push on red state legislators, especially red state senators. He's walking a fine line here. He probably doesn't want to implement things that will push those red state senators to be against him. But it looks like he's really going whole hog for this stuff. It might come to the point where the population pushes the senators. The bottom line here is that when Trump has power to control federal spending, he can use that to influence Congress. He can say to Congress people, I'm not going to send money to your state unless you support me. He can grant exemptions to states. We've seen for decades how corporations can bribe Congress. Now the president can bribe Congress too. And the only thing I see that can stop that is a popular uprising, is threatening these guys. And you know, there was a congressional recess last week, and a bunch of Congress people were in their home district going to town halls, and they had a really hard time in town halls. They had voters yelling at them, why are you doing this? Why are you doing all these things? Why are you firing veterans who have served our country and have been in civil service for 10 years and now are out of the job? Pressure on congressional delegations can help. Pressure on the stock market can help. Like I said, when he put the tariffs in place, the stocks went down, and he responded immediately by removing them. The other day, stocks took a dive just because consumer confidence is going down. That's another area where he pays attention. And there's some idea, there's some hope that if he does things that really hurt the stock market, he'll think twice. But that's not a constitutional way of reining him in. That's just a reality. What can we do? What should we do? We should raise legal challenges. We should have public protests. We should support advocacy groups. You know, Robert Reich, there's more than this. Media vigilance, electoral participation, education and awareness, corporate and institutional resistance. Robert Reich is the guy I follow carefully. He's a really smart guy. He's got a 10-step plan for what we need to be doing right now. We need to protect the undocumented workers. There's a whole bunch of undocumented people that are really fine people working their asses off to support our economy and make a home for themselves in our country. ISIS now says they can go into schools, places of worship, healthcare shelters, sanctuary cities. Here's an important thing. Sanctuary cities like Chicago, they have policies in place that will help defend these people. For example, in Chicago, you know, the federal government says if you know of an undocumented person, if you're a police officer, you know the police departments that know of undocumented persons have to tell ICE about it. But the federal government doesn't tell the police department they have to ask. Chicago has a policy in place where the policemen don't ask. I don't want to know your immigration status because if I knew, I have to report it. All of our municipalities, I speak to suburban Chicago municipalities frequently, and I tell these voters, tell your police department to implement these kinds of policies to defend the people that are serving tables in your community so they don't get deported. We have to work to protect the undocumented people that are not criminals, that are just seeking to become Americans. If you trust your mayor or city manager, check in with them to see that they're doing what they can. Their schools should say, nobody comes in here without a warrant. Organize your community. to support the undocumented, find hardworking, upstanding, undocumented people in your community. Your voice and your organization can help them protect the LGBTQ communities in members in your community. There's a lot of people that are out to get them, and we need to find ways we can help them. If you see bigotry, point it out wherever you see it, wherever you hear it, call it out. Get people to denigrate it. Get people to stop it. We need to, our brothers and sisters of whatever sexual proclivities, they're still human beings. They're still our brothers and sisters. They still belong here. They're still U.S. citizens. We need to defend them. If you trust your local city officials, get them involved. If you trust your police, get them involved. Help protect your officials in your community or state. I was just overjoyed to hear Governor Pritzker the other day really call out what's happening in his State of the Illinois address. Our local officials, our state officials, our secretary, our attorney general is filing suits to try and stop what's going on. These people all need our support. They need our thanks. They need to make sure that we have their back and that we're ready to help them. Some of these officials might be lower level folks who don't have a lot of economic means. If you see an official who needs legal help and lawyers, start a GoFundMe campaign to help raise money for them, to help them. Anybody who seeks harm to any of our officials because they're defending our democracy and defending our population, we need to have their back. We need to alert local law enforcement. Boycotts, participate in boycotts. This Friday is a boycott against any corporate purchases. We can show these people that have been supporting Trump. Many corporations have contributed to Trump's campaigns and his inauguration fund just because they want to be on his side and they don't want to be on the wrong side of Trump. We need to show them that if they do that, we're not going to be their customers. We should avoid any company that has been siding with them, especially Musk. I mean, there was a I hear tell from my friends that there was a protest in front of the local Arlington Heights area Tesla dealership with 500 people protesting the involvement of Mr. Musk in our government. The more of that we can do, the more we'll push people to understand what we care about and how they can implement the will of the people in this democracy. Loud, boisterous, attention-getting boycotts can hurt these people who think they're going to support Trump. Fund those who are litigating against Trump. These people, these groups that I've listed right here, the ACLU, Citizens Responsible Diversity and Responsible in Ethics, Center for Biological Diversity, the EDF, SPLC, Common Cause. If you can send them a few bucks, send them a few bucks. Those people are going into court and trying to save us. Spread the truth. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Help people know where to get the real truth. Make sure you know where to get the real truth. There's a whole bunch of sources here that Richard Reich supports. I support them. I read most of these, especially Heather Kotz Richardson. And read these sources. Get your truth in these sources. Speak your truth to your family and your community. Reference these sources. Help your people not talk to, oh, that was the wrong slide. Hang on. Help people avoid the wrong sources. You go to a restaurant that's playing Fox News, you tell them, turn that off or I'm leaving. We have to help people stop watching these things. Newsmax, X, even some of the Facebook feeds and Instagram feeds. They're full of bigotry and they're full of lies. Help your community wean themselves off of this stuff. Help your family and take action. Push for progressive measures, especially locally. When Trump says we're not going to support DEI, You make sure that your community and your state is going to support DEI no matter what the federal government says. You support progressive measures in your community. We have an election coming up in the local elections coming up in Illinois on April 1st. Research the candidates. If you see candidates that are out to ban books or restrict DEI, don't vote for those guys. Find the people that support the values that we support and vote for them. That is how we build up our nation from the bottom up. Encourage worker action. Unions are almost always on the right side of these things. You need to support unions. You need to patronize union shops. You need to use union workers. You need to encourage people to unionize. You need to support unions and boycott areas that refuse to support unions. And most importantly of all, we have to keep the faith. We have to not give up on America. It's easy to be discouraged now because there's so much stuff going on. But we know what their goals are. We know where they're trying to go, and we know how we can block them. We have to push our legislators. We have to push our local representatives. This was not an enormous win by Trump. It was a squeaker. He does not have this great mandate. The House Republicans are in deep trouble. It's very difficult for them to pass any bill without Democratic support. The Senate lost some ground. They can't get anything through without a filibuster. Sure, we have problems, but the reason we have problems is why we can't give up. We can't give up the fights for social justice, for equal political rights, for equal opportunity, for the rule of law, and the other side is looking for a fascism that they'd like nothing better for us to just give up and walk away and let them do it. Well, we can't let that happen. We can't give up. We must never give up because this is the real crisis. He wants to take full control of the entire administration. He's firing inspector generals. He fired the judge adjutants in the military, and they said outright, "We're getting rid of these military lawyers because they might stand in the way of our doing what we want to do." For God's sakes, they're even saying out loud what they're doing. They're firing anyone who stands in the way, civil service notwithstanding. They want to wrest control of all critical areas, Treasury payment system, GSA. They're destroying congressionally created agencies like USAID, the CSPB, the Department of Education, the NLRB, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They're just getting rid of anything that is a guardrail against their fascism. And he's allowing and empowering henchmen like Musk to do his dirty work for him and his team of youngsters. A lot of what they're doing is just illegal. Congress is supposed to control spending, not Trump. Congress creates agencies. Trump's destruction of them is not legal. It's not constitutional. Giving agency access and control to sensitive government operations violates guarantees of data privacy, and the courts have weighed in on that. Even his buyout offering is kind of illegal since the budget doesn't really exist. Now, the courts have authorized it, but still, I mean, so we can't totally depend on the courts, and some of these things are illegal, but Trump's DOJ is not going to prosecute those illegal actions. And if they did, he would just pardon them. The bottom line is he's out to destroy our form of government. Checks and balances are gone. Independent agencies are on the chopping block. Congress won't stop him. The courts can't keep up with his pace. He might even ignore them. We're in really big trouble here, folks. This is not a fire drill. This is a 5-alarm fire. If you look at what they really could want, this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who is one of their top thinkers, he wants absolute sovereignty to a single organization headed by a chief executive who would destroy public institutions, destroy the democratic process. Trump would give power to a CEO like Musk, who would turn the executive branch without any interference from Congress and courts. And most existing important institutions, public or private, could be shut down. Loyalists in place of civil servants. We're seeing that day by day in the Department of Justice, even in the Army. He fired the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff because he was black and because he says since he's black, he can't be qualified. And he fired the head of the Navy because she's a woman. And she says just because she's a woman, she must not have been qualified. These are all DEI hires and replaces them with people who will be loyal to him. Now, I have to say, the guy he put into um, the head of the military doesn't sound like a guy who will just be loyal to Trump, but who knows? They want to take over the country and they want to perform the real functions of government uh, as a corporation. Now, maybe it won't go that far, but this is possible. Look at this. I mean, Vice President Vance echoed everything you just heard, and Trump and his psychic billionaires are doing just what you heard. And he's taken a systematic approach, one that's been outlined in these public forums for years. And I don't care what you think. The guy's a Nazi. That's my bottom line. He's out to destroy our government. He's going to get rid of the Department of Education. He's got control of their internal data systems. The Congress would never do that. So Musk and Trump hope to hollow it up from within. Musk has said the destruction of the federal government, if it's not possible now, it'll never be possible. This is our shot, Musk says. This is our best hand of cards we've been going to have. If we don't take the advantage of this best hand of cards now, never going to happen again. That's what they're going for. They're going for taking over our government. And to many extent, he's seething. They've moved to shutter specific programs. They're being wasteful. Many of those are programs that are actually damaging to Musk's concerns. He seized control of the Treasury payment system, gained access to reams of private data. He could look up your social security number if he deemed to. It might not be as bad as you see here, but it might. There's a chance that he would be told to stop his unconstitutional dismantling, and he might even obey. There's a chance he'll get scared and declare a hasty victory, but more importantly, the chance it looks more and more remote. Musk now has seized control of many of the organs of state, and nobody seems there to stop him. Trump is giving Musk this power, and Musk is using that power to gut federal agencies, slash federal expenditures, and he seems to be doing it at his own whim, his own will. It may be Trump who sits in the Oval Office, but it may be Musk who's deciding exactly what to take down. The constitutional order at this point is window dressing. The reality is that this guy, foreign billionaire running the state through a shadow government, he's got the power. He has no formal checks. Our democracy is in danger like never before. Not even during the Civil War was our democracy in this danger. Dedicated public servants are being purged. Refugees who fled Venezuela are being sent back. His vile rhetoric against diversity will restrict opportunity that will weaken our nation. Matters of rule of law and public safety. Violent thugs who sacked the Capitol have been set free. FBI agents who tracked them down are in the crosshairs. It's getting worse every day. Every day, Trump gets to decide who gets a check from the government and who doesn't. He wants them to believe he's a king. He's called himself a king with the power to bestow or deny favors at his whim. He's not a king. We can act locally. Your municipal police should refuse to document immigration status. Your school board should require a warrant. You should discuss these issues with your family and friends and communities. We can press our legislators. Democrats must not support a budget that cuts essential services. But as to how he's destroying our constitutional democracy, support the organizations you've seen listed who are filing lawsuits, press our state governments. But mostly, I think we need to turn out and protest. We should have tens of thousands of people in the streets because what we really want is Congress to impeach and remove him. And they won't do it unless we demand it. We have to ensure that we come out in force, and we have to challenge him to take up arms against us. And there's another thing to say. I mean, this is all big stuff. This is all important stuff that we got to do right now. But a few years after this, there's another thing we got to do. We have to think about what's wrong with our Constitution that let this happen. Constitutional amendments are hard to do. They don't come frequently, but they come in spurts. You will see a time when 3 or 4 constitutional amendments happen in rapid succession, and it's usually after a calamity, after an emergency. Right after the Civil War, for example, we had 3 or 4 constitutional amendments that reinforced our government to make sure that what just happened can't happen again. Well, we're going to have that opportunity a few years out. When all this dust settles, when we defend our democracy against these folks, then we have to turn our sights to what was it in our Constitution that let that happen? How can we modify our Constitution so it can't happen again? That's going to require deep consideration a few years out, but we have to take that step too. And that's an important step because there's things we've wanted to do for a long time, like get rid of the Electoral College, that are hard to do. But when we've had this kind of emergency, when you had this kind of crisis, and we seriously think about what we need to change, that's the time we can change it. That's the time we could actually get rid of the Electoral College, for example. So, yes, we got to fight right now. We have to fight like heck right now to defend our Constitution and our democracy. But a few years out, we got to think seriously about revising our Constitution. Now, here's where I break up. You'll excuse me. The power to reclaim our country lies in your hands and mine. History is watching us. Will not be kind to those who stood by, because the path forward begins with you and me. We have to rise to the occasion. We have to defend democracy. We have to prove that we can take responsibility. America's future is built on courage, your courage and mine, not cowardice. Your actions and mine will define it. We need to push our legislators to stop this madness. And if it takes impeachment, that's what we have.